Okay, I think we're on.
Yeah, I see
So
that
Nick
little,
Walker, here is Nick.
hi. Hi, so I'm Nick Walker, and I am a queer autistic scholar, and I teach here at CIS in both the somatic psychology program and the undergraduate psychology program. And it was, I was one of Don's students back in the old days, back in the somatics program, the somatic MA program. And when was that? Like 2007, 2008.
10 years
Yeah,
ago, yeah.
said,
Last,
yeah, so long ago. And so, yeah, it was a great pleasure getting to contribute to the Diverse Bodies, Diverse Practices book. And I'm happy to be here to talk about it a bit.
great. I'm really happy you're here too. Um, I reread your chapter again today, and I'm so taken by it. It's such a lucid account of a different person. It's so good at alerting me how you are different from me. And one of the things that struck me that it also, as I can put it, um, it almost seemed to me you have a privileged diversity in that um, you're talking about the body of birth being diverse. So it's the diversity is not socially constructed. It's social instruction goes on top of it, but there's a lot of diversity just in who you are with your cells and your brain structure and all of that. So it's a very primal kind of diversity. Um, and it struck me that particularly in a learning environment, that in some ways is the diversity that trumps all others. Because if we're about a learning community, the primal basis from which we learn, if it's really radically different from what the school is designed for, we're in a lot of trouble. Now that's true of other diversities, but not to me, as I read your piece and reflected on it, it's not at the primal level that you're talking about. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. Yeah, it is. I see what you're getting at there, and yes, I have a vivid recollection around experiencing that in childhood because growing up, I was in elementary school and such in the 70s, and the education there, when we do like Black History Month and they teach us about Martin Luther King's civil rights movement and such, the anti-racist education that we would get would be very much about, and whatever their attempts at cross cultural education, the message was always, we shouldn't be prejudiced against other people over things like skin color and such because we're all the same inside. And that felt so hurtful and alienating to me because it was very obvious to me already by the age of 5 that I was not the same inside as everyone else. And so I would say that the whole pro-diversity message we were getting was actually a message of excluding me.
Wow, wow, wow. Yeah, I kind of felt that as I read how hard it must have been for you in school. Really hard. It's like, yeah. So I wanted to ask you kind of early on in our little time together, like as you think now about how you put all that stuff in the chapter many years ago, how do you feel about it now? Are there things different for you or?
Well, yeah, it's interesting that you led by saying, you got a sense of it rereading the chapter of me as a different person, because I look at the chapter now and I'm also a different person from the person in the chapter. And, most notably, coming out as a trans woman, though I haven't, I've opted to not medically transition for a lot of reasons like age and stuff, and the fact that I'm capable of somatically dealing with my gender dysphoria. So it's not as much of a necessity to transition physically for me as it is for others. I'm sort of transitioning somatically rather than medically. but I was right at the beginning of that journey when I wrote the chapter, and I didn't put it in the chapter. In fact, that book was the last time that I used masculine pronouns in an author bio.
Oh,
And I regretted it by like a couple months later. I regretted the choice not to. And I actually, the first time that I publicly like came out live to a group of people as trans was the launch party at CIS for the book. That was the first time. So,
oh,
so yeah, so the book would be different because of that, because I mean, the chapter would be different because of that, you know, because I would have had to find a way to integrate the gender angle into it somehow as well, which didn't feel as much of a pressing concern when I wrote the chapter.
so are they related?
They're very related. Yeah, actually, the autistic community is an extremely queer community, and there's a much higher incidence of being transgender among autistic people and among non-autistic people,
Really?
and yeah, and of queerness and gender nonconformity in general. Yeah, I mean, I know, you know, over the years I've known, because I've been deeply immersed in autistic community and such, I've known thousands of autistic people, you know, and hundreds among my friends. And I know two kinds of autistic people, essentially. I know autistic people who are uh, very queer in some way around gender and or sexual orientation, or autistic people who are uh, so rigorously performing heteronormativity that I'm sure that they're queer and hiding from it.
Huh, huh, huh. Interesting. Yeah. Um, I wonder if you could approach any of the lucidity that you did in the book about autism, like how you're different. If you could say a little bit about how the gender nonconformity came forward for you in details that have that kind of clarity that you did with the autism.
Well, that's actually a strange and complex story that I haven't tried to put into writing yet, and will have to eventually, um, because we'll start from as I mentioned in the chapter, autistic neurology, autistic brains have this extremely high level of cortical connectivity.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a very high neuroplasticity going on there, and that might be why we're so prone to queerness and synesthesia and all sorts of interesting special effects. Um, and certainly relates to how we process trauma. And as I think I note in the book, that all of us end up with very traumatic childhoods in a society that is not autistic friendly. And I had a highly abusive childhood. You know, that winning combination of abuse and neglect. And so what came up eventually as I sort of did my own long-term somatic healing process, and what I was grappling with sort of in that time period around when I wrote the chapter and in the years leading up to it, was realizing that I had dissociative identity disorder as a result of my childhood trauma. And just sort of coming to terms with realizing, oh, wow, there's these gaps in my memory and this history of like volatility, and just recognizing the level that, oh, okay, wow, this is actually, you know, and I am studying psychology and studying psychopathology, and realizing like, you know, for a highly plastic brain dealing with extreme childhood trauma, like this is something that can happen. And I had been encountering other autistic people who were also coming to terms with dissociative identity disorder, you know, which used to be called multiple personality. And so I set about curing myself of it. I set about just using, you know, the somatic toolkit that I had and the psychological toolkit that I had of learning how to not dissociate.
Wow. Well,
And essentially that it was like another extension of the process of healing from trauma that I talked about in the chapter. And what happened was, as I learned to not dissociate and not to slip into dissociative personas or like altered personalities that I'd formed for self-protection over the years, I started to recognize that the original me had been trans, that the original me had been feminine, and that essentially the layers of trauma that I had put on, and the layers, the dissociative identity disorder, the alter like personalities I'd had to put on to protect my core in childhood and such, had covered that up. That if I'd had a trauma-free childhood, I might have recognized myself as trans, in my childhood or adolescence, and transitioned quite young. But because of all those layers of trauma and the dissociative identity disorder and such, it was like, it took me that long, until my late 40s, to recognize, to get through all the layers and realize, oh, wow, the core self that I've been protecting all this time is in fact a transgender self. And so, yeah.
wow, thanks. That's really helpful. I want to, as you talk, it reminds me of another piece that I wanted to see that I got right.
Uh-huh.
Having known you and also having read you, I put together how, let's see, how can I say it, that your Aikido practice particularly
Yes.
provides you a kind of a home base of coming home, like when you talk about overcoming dissociation,
Mm-hmm.
dissociative states, that you have this practice. And there's something about your rootedness in your flesh and
Yes.
practice that seems really crucial as a healing journey.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And it was definitely, having that is like, I mean, it was like I already had the resources for grounding myself from the Aikido training. So when it came time to learn how to not dissociate and, deal with all of that, the dissociative identity stuff, it was like, okay, I realized that was what was going on with me, and the tools were already there for me.
Uh-huh.
So, one hears about, journeys of like, people spending 20 or 30 years of, intense psychotherapeutic treatment, if they have the sort of childhood that gives them dissociative identity disorder and fragments the personality like that. And it was really just a matter of a few years for me, not going to therapy, but once I figured out what was going on, it was just a matter of applying the somatic tools I already had of how to like ground in the flesh and keep from dissociating.
Uh-huh. Wow. Yeah, one reason it caught my eye is that I've had this kind of thought over the years that males are not the problem. Big males are the problem. Because I grew up, because I'm small, I was always bullied.
Mm-hmm.
So I was always in danger. And it was years until I began to have my own strength that I felt more able to kind of be there in the world and not be afraid of these big football players
Yes.
who were kicking me around.
And of course, I was small and autistic and gender nonconforming. Like looking back,
You were small. Really?
I was small.
Really?
Yeah, I was very small and skinny.
Wow, you really ballooned.
Yeah, well, I spent my my 20s, kind of in deep poverty and homeless a lot, and working my way out. I worked a lot of blue collar jobs and a lot of just, warehouse work, carrying big boxes all day and such. And so by the time I was in my late 20s, I was big. I actually used to be bigger. I think when you met me in the somatics program, I was downright burly, and I've lost a lot of it now because being, being trans and feeling femme, it's like I'm really not motivated to maintain muscle mass, but it's very interesting because I'm not medically transitioning or even cosmetically transitioning. I've by shedding the somatic toxic masculinity, I just feel femme all the time. And it's very interesting being in what's become a lesbian marriage, where my my wife is actually considerably less femme than I am in terms of our personalities and our embodiment. But but it is the fact that I was small and effeminate as a child and as a teen,
Uh,
and I now feel small and femme, but I'm still fairly muscular, and I'm almost 6 feet tall, and I'm in darn good shape for someone in their early 50s. So I have a potentially imposing masculine looking body and a small femme personality. And it's what's been fascinating about it. One of the things that's been fascinating about it from a somatic perspective, it carries a certain amount of privilege. There is that big male privilege that I still have, even though that's not who I am inside of. But how I carry myself and present myself has changed. And so I find that uh, uh, certainly people who are well attuned to that sort of thing, are not intimidated by me anymore. I used to be an intimidating presence, and people are not intimidated by my presence because of how I carry myself.
mm,
It's like almost the body usage matters more than the body size, kind of, or the body shape. There's something about me that no longer communicates large masculinity.
interesting. Yeah, interesting. I think of you and Kurt because you're both suffering from the way you look.
And Kurt, I remember also I think even mentioned in his chapter that he was fairly small and effeminate when he was young, before he went on artificial hormones and weight training and such. So yeah, he and I shared that experience of really dramatically changing into a very intimidating masculine presentation that never quite fit who we felt we were.
Right. I realized that also reading your chapter. I had a certain myth about you.
Mhm.
Um, I had this notion that you had very enlightened parents who gave you a lot of choices rather
My
than
parents were monsters.
that was, I don't know why I made that up.
Yeah.
Oh, you were so lucky to have such great parents. I guess
No,
they gave you all
no,
these opportunities to no.
absolutely not. No, the farthest from it. What happened, in fact, though, was that I was lucky compared to a lot of autistic people. I was lucky because uh, the many autistic people I know who had attentive parents, what happened was they got diagnosed as autistic early on. The parents thought, okay, there's something wrong with my child because they're so different from the other kids. And then they would get exposed to all of these often brutal or quack treatments and such, and all this like behaviorist torture to try to force them to conform with non-autistic standards. But as the product of extreme child neglect, my parents never noticed me enough to do that. So, because the household was so abusive and toxic and full of, constant drug use and such, the last thing my parents ever wanted to do was bring me to professional attention. So I escaped all these potentially abusive treatments just by virtue of my parents' negligence.
A strange advantage, right?
Yes. But I am definitely experiencing, though, in my middle age, the somatic effects of the child neglect. I mean, obviously there's a dissociative identity disorder from abuse and such, and the neglect, which is its own form of abuse, but also like I've been uh, grappling with chronic kidney stones because I spent so much of my early childhood dehydrated. So that damage from that is caught up with me in middle age. So, it's definitely, yeah, I had a terrible childhood.
I think the thing that stands out for me, and maybe would be helpful to the people that are reading and listening to this, um, is you've been such a successful learner, even though that in some ways is the root of the autism, is
Hmm.
having to learn in an environment that's not designed for your style of learning.
Hmm.
So I'm wondering if you can say anything about how you found a way to become a doctor. Actually, not only have managed to get through uh, graduate programs, but you've managed to get advanced degrees and to write a lot and to do all the things that doctoral students have to do.
Yeah.
And now you're teaching as a scholar.
Yes.
Uh, can you?
And I'm delighted. I'm really, I mean, I'm happy and still kind of reeling from the life I have now because I had not envisioned it as a possibility for myself, 25 years ago.
So can you say a little bit how you got here?
Uh, I will again the somatic journey, discussed in my chapter was very much a part of it. I think that's crucial is the somatic work um, of learning to ground myself and have maintained this. I talk about the combination of groundedness and expansiveness and relaxation and being able to carry that forward into these situations that were alien and potentially confusing and stressful like school. That was I think the big thing was just being able to stay grounded, like uh, in the face of things being challenging. So it really was a matter of doing that much somatic work, um, and just continually working. That great benefit of Aikido of uh, training to be grounded and stay expansive and present and relaxed in the face of actual physical attack. So that carries over very well to the experience of, a school situation that it would potentially be overwhelming for a lot of people. And I mean, there are advantages to the autistic mind too. There are a fair number of successful autistic scholars, who are starting to change the discourse around autism now, because it does confer a certain talents for pattern recognition, for instance. Um, so uh, I think though, I mean, CIS was really the environment I needed too. This is where I advertise CIS a little bit because it is uh, an autistic friendly environment as schools go in terms of everything from online learning options, so everyone is learning online right now, but in terms of online learning options, uh, but even in school, the classroom environment, small classes, the lighting isn't harsh, the just the acceptability of uh, not having to just sort of sit rigidly at desks through everything, the acceptability of moving around or taking one's shoes off, or so there's a lot of this. The CIS environment is a big help there. The kind of engagement that happens there, and even just finding support for uh, finding the fact that there were instructors at CIS who were interested in the kind of the kind of work I needed to do around, just like uh, my communication style is definitely atypical, and the writing I do and my way into, my way of engaging with ideas is distinctively autistic. And the fact that they're, dealing with teachers who had, you know, they're CIS teachers. They have all this experience with things like somatics and psychedelics and such, and so uh, they're open to that sort of like, oh, this is a different way of learning, a different way of engaging with things, and I'm into it. I'm here for it. Whereas I think, there are definitely, uh, less CIS, like more mainstream schools with a lot that are much more rigid about those things and much less friendly. And, like I say, I know a lot of successful autistic scholars, but most of them had the experience of having to fight their way through school and fight for accommodations. And that wasn't my experience at CIS, which is wonderful.
That's great. I'm also, oh, I'm sorry. Sorry. I'm also aware of reading you and thinking that I don't see autism in your writing. It seems really lucid, well organized.
Well, I think autistic minds are
It
lucid and well organized.
It just seems utterly clear and easy to deal with.
I think that's very much a result of autistic cognition. There's two factors there. I mean, one thing, every autistic person I know is in love with clarity because, our sensory experience and our social and cultural experience is so much like this. There's the sensory experience of a lot of noise happening on every sensory channel, and the sensory channels blending together. And there is the experience of the social and cultural experience of interacting in a non-autistic cultural milieu that is where the rules of social interaction seem so unclear, and where we're always in trouble for not understanding what the rules of social interaction are in the non-autistic social realm. And so we love clarity, and I think that part of it is a response to the difficulty of finding clarity and the struggle for it, and part of it is just a natural high that happens, a capacity to find sensory and cognitive and emotional joy in clarity. In the moment that a pattern becomes clear, things resolve themselves. And so yeah, the love of clarity, definitely. I'm glad to hear it comes through in my writing because I love it, and I love it in other people's writing. And the other factor that goes into my writing and has really worked for me as a writer, I'm not a fast writer. And there are people who, can sit down and write a first draft, at least stream of consciousness, just writing. But I don't have a stream of consciousness that has words in it.
Uh-huh.
And it was a shock to me when I was younger, and starting to hear people talk about James Joyce's Ulysses and how well it captures stream of consciousness. Like, it was a shock to me to hear that there were people who had a stream of words running through their head when they thought. And so I'm experiencing, whatever knowledge and experience I have, whatever content there is in my cognition that I might want to write about, I'm experiencing it as this felt, complex, fractal, geometric phenomenon. And so to be able to put that into words requires finding starting points and figuring out step by step, well, what's the baseline information my readers need in order to understand this? And then what's the next thing, and what's the next thing? And so I'm building, whenever I'm writing, I'm building a step-by-step model of some complex fractal three-dimensional structure. And so it becomes, this clarity is partly a product of a painstaking effort to unravel a complex shape into a linear stream of words.
Wow, that's so wonderful. I think that you may want to go back to this tape sometime and write an essay on the need for clarity. You just did a little wonderful riff there for 5 minutes. That was, that was really great. Thank you for that. it's fascinating. I have the same experience right now that I did in reading your chapter. I think there's a clarity that emerges. It's crystal, and it's like a really bright crystal. It's really quite wonderful. Yeah.
Thank you.
As we kind of come to the end of our little recording, I wondered if you want to say anything about what your edges are and advice for these people that are now listening to you and seeing you and reading you.
Oh, I mean, my edges, you know, there's always there's always edges because I'm always working and developing. So you know, it's I'm always working on the clarity and coherence of what I'm doing as a teacher, and on you know, just how I inhabit my body, still adapting to this trans thing, and what does it mean to do a femme embodiment in a body that structurally, you know, doesn't look it, and isn't, you know, what is, how do I do this as sort of an act of somatic shape shifting and tapping into how do I express, you know, what my essence is with the instrument I have, and how much can I transform that instrument in a non-medical way, just from the inside and from somatic shifts. How do I stay always looking on bettering my Aikido? How do I stay more present and more gentle and more clear yet soft? You know, how do I make my connections with people better? You know, I mean, you know, as someone also who's in a long-term marriage, you know, like that's an endless, you know, how do we deepen this? What's that work of connection and partnership? Just doing creative work. Yeah, so many edges to explore, but I'm blessed to be at a point in my life where exploring edges is now sort of about how do I make this better? How do I deepen this, or you know, follow this path through more completely, rather than, you know, oh my gosh, I'm drowning in this. How do I get some sense of safety and stability at all? Like, you know, I've gotten at least to a stable ground from on which to build. And yeah, in terms of advice, I mean, I guess since this is for doctoral students, stick with it. Do your doctoral work. Yeah, I'm excited actually at the thought of being on dissertation committees. I've been on a few dissertation committees so far and really enjoying it. And so I really want to be there for the next generation, and definitely to anyone who's doing the work. I want to, you know, I would say, you know, find what you're really interested in, you know, write about what you're really interested in, and what excites you, and go deep into it.
Mhm. That's lovely. Yeah, I've been so taken by you over the years. And one of the things I really appreciated with you, I realized towards the end here, is I can't do my work the way I want to unless people help me to know what they need.
Yes,
And
yes.
it's partly your clarity that's really helped me to meet your diversity and have the fruitful relationship we've been able to have. I appreciate your being willing to educate me. so I'm grateful for that.
I'm grateful for the opportunity to work with you, and for, you know, I mean, yeah, you've been such an important teacher in my academic journey.
Thanks.
And
So
I
we'll
still
keep
I
going.
still assign your writing to students.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for taking time, and I'll look forward to all of people telling me how they liked all of this.
Wonderful.
So I'm going to click the recorder off, and then you and I can spend a couple of minutes saying goodbye.
Okay.
Let's see here. I'm going to turn this off.